everything that exists in the world exists as it does for a purpose, including you and me. There are some interesting commonalities among ancient creation myths that stand in contrast to Genesis 1 and 2. In ancient mythology, as we noted earlier, the gods were associated with the various functioning aspects of the world. But regardless of how the gods and their relationship to the world were conceived of, the one common element that set all religious worldviews apart from Genesis was the belief that the realm of the gods and the realm of the world were merely different parts of the same realm. And once again, the Bible's view of the world is totally different. The world is not a performance stage with gods and goddesses acting out their roles where human beings can do nothing but spectate. Notice the deliberate and intentional structure to Genesis chapter 1. It begins with a description of the initial conditions of the world before God's creating work begins. Verse 2 says, "Now the earth was formless and empty." Now notice the structure of God's creating work. On day 1, He creates light and time. On day 2, the sky and climate. On day 3, He creates habitable space, land, and vegetation. So the first 3 days, God deals with the formlessness by creating form and structure. From day 4 to 6, He deals with the emptiness of creation. On day 4, He fills the sky with lights and time markers. On day 5, He fills the sea and the sky with living creatures. And on day 6, He fills the habitable land that He created with all kinds of animals and insects and crawling creatures. And as the climax of His creating work, He makes mankind. So in answer to our question, what kind of world did God create? Genesis 1 teaches us that the world is a created thing, ordered according to intentionally designed and differentiated forms, functions, and functionaries, which means that everything that exists in the world exists as it does for a purpose, including you and me. Which leads us to the third critical aspect to answering our ultimate question. As we talked about ancient mythology earlier, the reality for the ancients was that they thought of people as created slaves to serve the gods. For the most part, their sense of meaning came from the knowledge that the gods couldn't get along without them. And therefore, religious practice centered around appeasing or meeting the needs of the gods. But the God of the Bible has no needs, and therefore doesn't create the world for His own use. On the contrary, the world that God formed is ideally tailored for humanity's needs. Listen to what God says. "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish of the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." Mankind was made to rule the earth. But our rule isn't for us. We rule as God's image bearers, which means that our rule represents God's rule. So we can't use or misuse the world for whatever we want. Rather, our created purpose is to tend the earth and care for it on behalf of God. Now notice what comes next. What was God's purpose in making the world and mankind to live in it? Genesis 1:28 says, "God blessed them and said, 'Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground.'" You see, it was God's purpose that through blessing the man and woman's sexual union in marriage and reproductive capacity, that mankind as God's image bearer would spread to inhabit and rule over the entire earth. So let's just review what we've learned in answer to our first ultimate question, what is the world? We learned that the world is a creation with God as its creator. We learned that the world is an ordered creation, which means that everything in the world exists and functions for a reason. And we learned that the world is an ordered creation created by God for mankind to rule as His vice-regents. That's what the world is, and that's who we are. But this raises one little question that we can't ignore. Why? Why did God create such a world as this with us living in it? You just watched a very small part of our video series called Seeing the World as Jesus Sees It. If you want to learn more about how the Bible can change the way you see everything and transform your life, then click on the link in the description below. And thanks for watching.